Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so before I start, you should have uploaded your files to the assignment on Teams. So the notes that you took from the task from last lesson, you should be making sure that you have uploaded that to the assignments that I am showcasing to you at the bottom of the screen. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so the first thing that you want to do is to review your knowledge of the production process. This could be anything to do with stages of production or integration in any way. And just think of any particular key term that comes into your head that you may have gone through. Give yourself a couple of minutes, pause this video, and then we can move on afterwards. Okay, so let's check this out. So you could have turned around and thought about different types of integration. So you could have had vertical integration and you could have had horizontal integration. Vertical integration refers to the different stages of production and how they are owned by the same company. Horizontal integration focuses on different media products being owned by the same company. So I like to think of this as a bit of a tree. If you think about the way it goes up and down, that is vertical integration, and horizontal, the way that the kind of branches sort of span out. So you could have also had stages of production, so start with the simplest: pre-production, production, and post-production, but you might have had other things that came into that as well. So you might have had spin-offs, serial, exhibition, distribution, streaming, marketing, axing, commissioning, teaser trailer, critical success, platforms, screenplay, or even ratings, right? All of those things work with a process of key terms that you'd be able to understand for TV production and the process that goes into making a TV product. So our learning objectives today are to recall the information about the TV production process and how it works. You've already started to do that. It is a good idea to review your notes from previous lessons. If you've already gone through this already, get familiar with those key terms, but we will kind of go through that as well. But generally, we have done this before, or you've had some similar or some familiarity with it. So you could be able to understand how your knowledge is applied to the case study of the bridge, and you should be able to start using your knowledge from today's lesson to identify links with different theoretical perspectives. So the TV production process, okay, it starts essentially with commissioning and a commissioning brief, all right? So TV companies respond to briefs set by broadcasters. So they may be looking for the new Luther, they may be looking for the new Humans, and what they do is they put a brief together, similar to the things that you would respond to in your NEA, actually. And production companies have the opportunity to go in and pitch for those ideas. This is for funding, all right? So the broadcaster will fund the production process, and they will appoint, if you are successful, a exec producer to oversee that production process. Their job is to sort of protect the channel's interests, and that's where that exec producer role comes from. Now, production companies that pitch to big broadcasters usually have an established relationship already, or they've got sort of precedent in being able to produce high quality production work. Sometimes these can be joint ventures, and we're seeing this more and more often. But if a production company has a rate of success with productions already and has produced critical acclaim for these productions, then they might or may be more likely to be successful in getting the pitch already. So the bonus for co-productions for production companies is that you're sharing the load. You know, you're expanding both areas of expertise. You get to share resources. You get to split the production costs and therefore the budget as well. So essentially, this is all sort of pre-production, and I think of this as like an egg, right, being hatched into a chicken. Obviously, eggs can come into other things, but I'm going to use the chicken analogy here. And so a production company will be given, once they're successful from the process of commissioning, an amount of money, and that will see the production company through, except that they will have at the end of it a sort of reserve amount which will be paid to them on completion. And essentially this money that they're given in advance is used to hire crew, actors, might be hiring bigger actors, bringing them onto contract. It will be essentially scouting different locations, seeing how they meet the criteria. Be script development and rehearsals. There'll be the whole logistics of production that will be involved, and that kind of sums up the production process really in sort of very tight information. And then you enter into the process of production. So this is where your egg starts to hatch, if you pardon the analogy. And this is where the physical filming of the production starts to take place. All right. Producers are in constant communications with the broadcasters, and the exec producer will be going down on particular days to make sure that the company is adhering to what they have agreed. And it is contractually looking like what they've commissioned, and that happens both on and off set. Production managers are usually the last to leave a set because they are the ones that are trying to deal with the logistics of what's happening the next day. Obviously, producers, change of scripts and drafting, etc. They'll all be happening. So production from the logistics side is always the last to go. They will be filmed on locations, and they could be used on different locations. For example, if you're looking at a film or a full motion picture, then going to other countries may have financial benefits for your company, which we'll go into when we start looking at the bridge. But an example of this would be the Copenhagen Film Fund. And essentially, you start to work with broadcasters on marketing strategies, promotional strategies. You might even start some sort of covert marketing at this stage of production, not till it's completed, but there might be some different events that may be focused towards your target market, just to kind of get a little bit of a buzz going. And then essentially you enter into the phase of post-production. This is where your egg is pretty much hatched. You've got all the components you need, and the chicken comes out. So this is where the editing starts to happen. So all the shots are put into sequences essentially via that process. Then it enters a stage of distribution, actually getting it out there. And exhibition is when the audience actually physically start to watch it. So when we think about this in terms of the bridge, examples of this is that getting it to BBC4, for example, putting on iPlayer and Netflix, although they weren't the commissioning broadcaster in the terms of the bridge, but we'll go into that in a bit more later. So in this distribution area, then you will start a marketing strategy. This could involve creating teaser trailers or trailers, getting your crew and cast together for interviews. It might be on TV shows or magazines, and essentially you could be using conventions. So we have like DragCon, for example. So RuPaul would probably be promoting the latest series there, or you could have different sort of conventions, sci-fi conventions, etc. So that's what you could get your cast and crew to do in the form of press junkets, really. And that will sort of filter through to sort of all the main distributors. But what you're trying to achieve is critical success. You want it to be well received. You want to ensure that your audience share, so that's the percentage of people that are watching TV at that particular time slot, is high, because if you don't get that audience share, then essentially you can't promote it and there won't be any success coming after that. So it's highly likely that if you don't get an audience share, then your show will be axed, right? So if we think about this in terms of the bridge, right, now the bridge was a co-production. It's a co-production between Sweden and Denmark. In fact, the broadcasters that commissioned this were STV1, which is Sweden's public service broadcaster, and DR1, which actually stands for Denmark Radio, bizarrely. But they essentially own a lot of public service broadcasting outlets such as radio and TV, and they are a public service broadcaster as well. And essentially, they're set up in a very similar way to the BBC is, to educate, entertain, and inform, which is a sort of a remit that all public service broadcasters have. And so it's a co-commission, it's a co-production by them, and their idea behind public service broadcasting is to produce high quality programming. And so it's funded. So the BBC is funded by us, for example, via our license fee. However, in Sweden, this funding comes from a public service tax that is based on personal income. So if you don't earn for a particular amount, say you're on benefits or you were retired, then essentially what would happen is that other people would be paying for your contribution for the public service broadcaster, in this case STV, right? That's because they had to try to compete with commercial broadcasters, and that's why you see here two public service broadcasters working together. Now, it's funded similarly in Denmark. They have scrapped the license fee as of last year, in 2019, and replaced it with a similar tax, but theirs isn't as luxurious as Sweden's, for example. They, in real terms, have cut their public service spending in terms of moving from this TV license system to a tax-based system by about 20%. So that's got more of an initiative, really, for the company DR to make more co-productions because their money can go a lot further. Now, public service broadcasters are under threat, really, by commercial channels. This is mainly because commercial channels and the way that we have changed in terms of viewing media and viewing TV broadcasts has changed with the likes of IPTV, such as Netflix and Amazon. So essentially what you're finding is more of them working together to ensure that they can spread their money and develop content that meets these criteria to sort of educate, inform and entertain in terms of the BBC, but also in terms of producing and staying ahead of the game in terms of competitors. Even though there aren't real competitors, they're not set up as competitors, and certainly within Britain, a piece of legislation that was passed under the last Labour government meant that the BBC couldn't compete. So you saw changes in scheduling where, for example, Saturday Night used to compete over X Factor and Strictly. You don't have that anymore. So Strictly sets its time of when it's going to be in, and X Factor will get it and try and sort of schedule it just before. And that's because they want to gain that major share, audience share, before people start settling down to viewing. So that doesn't happen anymore. You used to have a race for publication as the schedules changed in TV listing magazines, but you don't have that anymore. But essentially, it is held up. So a lot of that's sort of an example of how the broadcasting industry has been affected by changes in regulation. But that's mainly within the UK. But essentially, Sweden and Denmark are in a similar status if you research into the context of what's happening with their public service broadcasters. So co-productions such as The Killing, Humans, The Night Manager, and of course I am sure you are more than familiar with Killing Eve. All of these are co-productions, all right? So they have got high production values so that they've got special effects in them. They can go to exotic locations because they can combine the resources of working together as two public service broadcasters and resources if you were a commercial channel. The benefits is that, as I've said previously, that they can share the load, really, in terms of making their production budget stretch, but also they can share in the risk. So the fact that you're only putting half of the budget in, if it isn't particularly successful, then you haven't really lost out. But essentially, because public service broadcasters sort of pioneer content, they are less adverse in taking risks because they don't have to worry about loss affecting their commercial nature because they don't have shareholders. We, in effect, are their shareholders. We own them as a public service broadcaster. And so therefore, we can criticise them, or we can hold them to account if they have frivolously spent money. For example, the BBC logo change. But the production companies that are behind the bridge are Filmlance, which is Sweden's largest independent production company, and Mimbus, which is Denmark's third largest production company. So in terms of productions, these companies have a long reputation with being able to produce content for TV channels. They have a reputation with working with these channels, so they know and can rely that they are going to produce content that is reflective of what those public service broadcasters, STV and DR, want to produce. Now, SVT, has its own studios as well. So that's another type of integration. So what type of integration is it? I'll let you all think. It's vertical integration because they own different stages of the production process. Now, this is good for them because they own that. They don't have to pay the overheads. They've already got that in part of their budget. They don't have to go to another company and employ their services. So that's a benefit for them. But they're actually owned, not STV, but Filmlance are actually owned by Endemol Shine Group. Now, Endemol was a company that started in the Netherlands. You don't really need to know this, but it's a company that started in the Netherlands and started to produce huge content. It merged with Shine, which was owned and still is owned by Murdoch's daughter, Rupert Murdoch's daughter. And so they merged together to create the Endemol Shine Group, which actually was owners of the production company behind Life on Mars for a while before they sold it off. So you can see that this is evidence of a global network chain. All right. So it's part of a conglomerate that sort of feeds into other areas. And it's quite interesting to sort of see that it spans different areas. And we can see that our production companies are sort of working with other international companies. And when we think about DR, for example, this is about how successful a public service broadcaster can be. This describes them as being a mainstream public service broadcaster. They're in the mainstream flow because 97% of the population of Denmark interact with one at least once every single day with a platform that DR1 own. And that's amazing. All right. It used to be that the BBC's website. Sorry about that. So that is amazing, right? It is genuinely quite amazing to have that sort of uptake, so that we know that that's going to be able to be quite a lot of might, even though it's a smaller population in Denmark. At least we know that that's going to have a little bit of might when we kind of talk to audiences. So why have they used different locations? This concept of the bridge. Now, this is really interesting, really. But essentially, if you're going to film on international locations, you can get tax relief and you can get benefits from going to those locations. So Skyfall, for example, went to Mexico and they got some reimbursement for going there by the Mexican government. We have in this country Film London, and we've got the UK Film Fund, which international companies can apply to get money back from us, and we've also got tax relief, etc. Now, for the bridge, this was primarily filmed in Sweden, which means that they had to abide by all of the regulations in terms of working hours, etc., and contractual obligations that fall under the law of regulations for Sweden. But this meant that they could get access to the Creative Europe Media Fund. Now, essentially, by basing it in one country, they can get access to this fund, and they can are more likely to get it as Sweden than Denmark for different structural reasons really to do with how it's financed. But Sweden applied through their production company to the Creative Europe Media Fund, and they got €1 million grant for the production of the bridge. All right, and that is to kind of develop creative elements and sort of to uphold the creative industries within the European Union. England is no longer part of that because we have Brexited the European Union, and we have left the European Union. We do have similar funds, as I've sort of mentioned, but we do have a huge creative media industry in the UK. So watch this space in terms of what's going to happen there. But in terms of Sweden, they also were able to apply to go to Copenhagen, where they filmed quite a lot of the production. And that meant that they could apply to the Copenhagen Film Fund for extra money because they were publicising Copenhagen, right? Now, they couldn't have been able to do that or apply for that money if they were Danish. All right. So if they were based in Denmark, they wouldn't be able to apply for that money. So that's why they make the decision to base themselves in Sweden. It gives them more ability to access extra money. So when we're thinking about BBC4, BBC4 haven't commissioned this programme. All right. What they have done is they have gone through a process that they call acquisition. So they have bought it. All right. They have bought the rights to the bridge and to broadcast it within the UK. And this is called syndication. When you buy a format from an established broadcaster, you are essentially getting it on lease. Now, you can have two different elements here. You can buy a format which will enable you to make a version of that production for the UK, and you own the rights to that, but obviously you will still pay a leasing. So you see that a lot with X Factor. So you have it different, and Britain's Got Talent, Australia's Got Talent, etc. And that is called syndication. But you can also have just the rights to broadcast within the UK. So essentially it's a bit of a complicated situation, but syndication operates in two ways. You have format syndication, which is you've bought the rights to the format, and then you have syndication in terms of broadcasting rights as well. And so BBC4 have got a sort of remit, like BBC Three does, to sort of speak to young people and appeal to young people in their audiences. International programming is part of their sort of main bread and butter. Also arts programming and music programming. Anything that is to do with enriching culture essentially is what BBC4 focuses on. And so they have a time slot which is on 9 p.m. on Saturdays, entitled Subtitled Slot. All right. And this is for contemporary international drama. So that's where the bridge sits, because it is a Nordic film noir, because it is subtitled and is based outside the UK. It's essentially enriching the audience is understanding of other European cultures. And that's where that kind of sits in terms of broadcasting. So it is post-watershed. This means that they can have more adult content, swearing, more violence, because it's assumed that children aren't up watching television. This is kind of old and antiquated. It differs massively from European regulations. So, for example, the Netherlands and Scandinavian countries, for example, all of those little labels that you see on the sort of PEGI game industry, all of those actually flash up before a TV program. So you get cartoons like South Park being transmitted in the sort of middle of the day, sort of 10 o'clock in the morning. And that is because their regulatory system doesn't impose the corporations or the broadcasters. What it does is it says, we're going to put this on, but it's up to the parents to actually enforce this censorship. If you don't want your kids to be watching that, then you don't tend to watch that program. It's up to you as parents to regulate that. So it's a very different sort of system. So essentially, in Sweden, Denmark, it is broadcast originally on Wednesdays. In Denmark, it is broadcast at 8 p.m. and in Sweden, it's broadcast at 9 p.m. And this protects against piracy as one point, because they're controlling the content. It's being released at the same time. So there's a very minimal chance of that being taken off and then uploaded to the internet. But essentially, it allows both broadcasters to air the next episode at the same time. All right. Now, when you air something at the same time, it's called simulcast. All right. So that is when a program, essentially, or two broadcasters broadcast the program at the same time on different channels or in different areas. You find this in HBO. So HBO with Game of Thrones, for example, broadcast in America, and then it was released at the same time in the UK, but it was obviously early in the morning. So it was first broadcast there because it was a massive show, and you essentially simulcast across a global setting. The more global the company, the more able that they'll have to reach out to other organisations. So on that note, the bridge has got sold to 174 countries. It's been broadcast in 174 countries worldwide, and it has 4 different seasons. It's also been subject to loads of remakes, or a couple of remakes, or format enhancements. And you can see that in the bridge in the American version, which was aired on FX. And then you've got the tunnel, all right, which was a Sky One broadcast, but that was actually a co-production between the UK and France. It's not very good, but if you really want to enrich your knowledge, you can watch those and sort of compare them to the bridge. Now, what they also did to reach out to a more global audience was put it on Netflix. All right, this allowed them to get into Germany, into Canada, Switzerland, and Austria, and essentially it's opening up a different market. And they do that by them. Oh, you might also like this. They use their algorithms to say, you watch this, so you must like this. And that means that essentially people that watch Nordic Film Noir will automatically get a notification that there is a new version of it to them. Similarly, if they watch crime drama, they'll be notified as well. Or if they may have watched something similar, then they will be informed. Or you may also like this. All right, that's where the kind of algorithms come into play. So before you watch the next lesson, do some reading. There's this great book called Media Theory for A-Level, and I suggest that everyone buys a copy because essentially it goes through all the theories that you need for the course. And I want you to read Steve Neal's Concept 2, Industry Effects on Genre-Driven Content, and Hesman Hall's Concept 1 and 2 in terms of maximising profit and minimising risk, and his ideas about cultural industries. Now, these are linked in some way, so you can start to be able to argue about this. Now, you should have been able to check out previous videos where I've gone through genre theory in relation to life on Mars. So you should have already approached that. But essentially, you want to do some background reading. So chapter 4 will cover that concept, page 45 to 50, and chapter 14, concept 1 and 2, that pages 153 to 165. They will cover Hesman Hall's cultural industries. Right? Make notes that are relevant to you. Okay? Don't turn around and just list things randomly. Highlight, create little visuals. Mind maps are great. I do a lot of mind maps, just so that you can start to think about how these two theories can kind of link together. So I hope you are a bit more knowledgeable and informed, and that helps you a little bit get into the skin, or get under the skin of how the TV production process works and how it sort of relates to the bridge. We will go in more detail into next lessons, into the marketing, etc. But see you next time. Take care. Bye.